Doctors, Paul, thanks for joining us here before your rally for the Republicans. And because you're the candidate here in Kentucky, with all due respect to Ron Paul, we'll start with you, Rand. First of all, it's a rally for the Republicans, and you've made very clear from the very beginning that you are a Republican.
Right.
At the beginning of the campaign, though, wasn't there some question about that, though, in terms of maybe the GOP would best fit the campaign, but is that exactly what you were? So to kind of explain that for me.
Well, the interesting thing is I've always been a Republican. I registered as a Republican when I was 18, went to the Republican convention when I was 13 when my family supported Reagan. So I've always been a Republican. So I think really in my case, as opposed to my opponent's case, there's never really been a question that I've always been a Republican.
And Ron Paul, to you, I mean, isn't there a redefining of the party always going on, especially right now?
Yeah, and I think that is the big issue right now, because you hear about Tea parties and other kind of parties and independents and all. But no, I think the Republicans are going through, a transition on trying to define themselves, because the Republican Party had a tough time a couple of years ago because they sort of didn't do the job they were hired to do when they got control of the House and Senate and the presidency. And so they're struggling now to get their credibility back and define themselves. And one thing I've noticed in Washington, when they're out of office, they're real good conservatives. It's the problem. The people know this, that when we get in office, then we don't have the determination to do what we promised the people. And that's what the American people are after now. They want people to go into office, say what they believe in, and expect them to do it. And this is where we are today. And people aren't going to buy into the Democratic label or the Republican label when you think about, Massachusetts. Here we have a Republican up there. So I think it's an interesting time, but I think all of us, whether you've been in the Republican Party a short time or a long time, you're participating in defining that particular party.
The nation's top elected Republican is Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. How would you describe his leadership first to you?
Well, first thing, I've never met him, and I don't have, a strong opinion one way or the other. If you ask me about John Boehner, I've met him, but I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I mean, they're Republican leaders, and they fit in the mold. They've been in Washington, but I don't have any one strong opinion one way or the other.
And Dr. Paul, you and I have talked a couple times about that in the past about that. And one question I asked you before was about the hypothetical Jim DeMint versus Mitch McConnell battle for majority leader.
Right.
But you know why I asked the question. It was more about who best fits the mold of the leader of a Republican Party that you would like to see. So I'll ask that question again to you, but then ask you, do you think that Mitch McConnell is the kind of leader of the GOP that you would eventually want?
Right. I think in some ways he's been very good at being a minority leader. In some ways we've been very good at opposing Obamacare. Now we maybe have a chance of stopping that, reintroducing, the health reform that we'd like to. And so I think he has done a good job of that. I try to compliment him on the areas where we agree. But I think Kentucky wants 2 senators. They don't want 1 senator. And so he's fought for 10 years to overturn McCain-Feingold. I think that's a very noble goal. It was overturning legislation that another Republican introduced. It shows that we as a party are big enough to disagree. He disagreed with John McCain on McCain-Feingold, fought it in court, and the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 last week. I called his office to compliment him. Even though he isn't being particularly helpful in my primary, I will ask him for his support after the primary.
And do you think he is supporting Trey Grayson then?
He's doing fundraisers for him, but I think I'm a big enough person that we're going to win the primary, and when the primary is over, I want to work with the whole party, not just part of the party.
And where do you think that the Republican Party has failed the most?
Well, I say our platform is wonderful. Our platform says we don't bail out private businesses. Our platform says we don't have government ownership of business. But we voted for the bank bailout. Look at the president the other night. The president says, everybody hates the bank bailout. Well, why did he vote for it? You know why he voted for it? He didn't read it like the rest of them. It was printed at midnight, 1,000 pages long, passed at noon the next day. They don't read the bills. That's why people are coming behind our campaign, because we're saying, stop, wait a minute, read the bills.
So see a chip off the old block.
I don't know. You sound better than I do. So you must have learned well, plus some others. So no, I think.
What is it like for you, just personally, to hear him, to see him in this mold? First of all, where a year ago, I mean, when did you actually declare your candidacy?
That's August, actually.
So so a year ago, obviously, you're a well-known ophthalmologist in Bowling Green. an eye surgeon there. But when you see him doing this now, what's this as a...
Well, I think it's pretty pleasing, but I was pretty pleased when he went to the medical school I went to, became a doctor, and went to that same medical school and became an ophthalmologist, and that pleases both my wife and I very much. So, matter of fact, in life, sometimes that may well be more important, but it also proves the point that he's done something other than politics. So, but both are very pleasing.
Just in terms of, obviously, you're known, and your son has described you very aptly over the last few months when we've talked a couple times, as really being a hero to many people, to stand up for libertarian small L values and that kind of idea. Do you think that he has an opportunity to be an even bigger leader than you in that respect if he's elected to the U.S. Senate?
Oh, I think so, because I still am a little bit bewildered, about the amount of attention I've gotten, because, after you've been saying it for 30 years or so and nobody listens, you figure, well, nobody's ever going to listen. But all of a sudden, last couple of years, but events have changed. And that's why he has a tremendous opportunity. And the people have an opportunity to look at these issues, because you don't, if you talk about for instance, a Federal Reserve System, nobody cares, nobody understands it, and all of a sudden you have a financial crisis, and the Federal Reserve is involved. All of a sudden, what you have been talking about becomes very, very important. And I think that is the difference, and it's given me the opportunity. But still, it's a surprise to me. But I think he has unlimited opportunities compared to what I've done.
And is there a danger, I'll ask you first, of being overshadowed by your dad?
I think my dad has helped me tremendously. Not many people could run for statewide office as a first race, so because I've been part of that movement, I've helped him, have become well-known within the movement that he started, it definitely helps. But I also tell people, there are a lot of kids of candidates who never win, and I may be one of them, but the only way I win is on my own 2 feet and being able to present the message, and I have a great deal of respect and owe him so much, but I can't win it just on his coattails. I have to do it on my own.
Was there any reticence on your part to come here today just because of that danger of overshadowing your son?
Yes, matter of fact, I would say that if other people judge what I've done so far, why haven't you done more, So, no, this is the first time I've been here, and it's going to be a couple hours. So the way I figure, I couldn't be looking over his shoulder when he was in medical school, so I'm not going to be looking over his shoulder in politics. And besides, people think differently, and it's a different atmosphere, different state. So, no, I don't think it would be an advantage to him. And I wasn't jumping up and down. I didn't call and say, hey, I bet I could really help you up, but let me get up there. Then when it was suggested, I said, well, I just might be able to work that in the schedule.
Tell me about some of the issues that your opponent especially has fixated on, and other opponents. There's a website, I don't know if you're aware of this, that called the both of you too kooky for Kentucky. Okay, and so welcome to Kentucky. But some of the views are, for instance, let me ask both of you your views. Is America responsible? You think is it America's fault that 9/11 happened?
No, they're not at fault. They didn't get blamed, but I have talked a lot about this, that America's you and me, and you and I aren't at fault, but policies have consequences, ideas have consequences. It's sort of like saying that the people are at fault because they allow their government to spend too much. Well, the policies are bad, and I do challenge the policies overseas, and I think they do have consequences, but that's a lot different than blaming America.
But America, as far as an institution, as a government, you think that the American government then is in part responsible for 9/11?
For a long time, I think we've gotten, off base on it. Just the same as I talk about monetary policy a lot. Started in 1913. I talk about tax policy. Started back then. Foreign policy shifted. So I like to talk about thinking about what the old right used to talk about in foreign policy, and that is sort of what George Bush talked about in the year 2000. When he was running, he said, he says, maybe we shouldn't be doing all this nation building and playing policeman of the world, as he was criticizing Clinton. And I just stayed consistent to that message, and I think the American people like that message.
How much like your father are you in that position on 9/11?
What I would say is that the most important thing you say from the beginning is if someone murders your family, it's their fault. You know what I mean? We say these people attacked us, and we say it is their fault. Now, there are other questions you can ask about it. Did they murder your family because you left your house unlocked? So, I mean, there are ways of looking at it, and you need to look at the big picture, and the big picture includes foreign policy. I think there's a danger sometimes, and where people misinterpret my father, I think, is that they think somehow it is blaming America, and it's not. We are not to blame for people attacking us. It is their fault, and they did something horrendous, and that's how the conversation needs to begin. But then we say, why in the global scheme of things are these happening? And the interesting thing is that, well, many people say we don't look at this. In Saudi Arabia, we had bases, and we no longer have bases. Osama bin Laden wanted us to leave Saudi Arabia. Did we appease him? Well, it was the George Bush administration that left Saudi Arabia. Maybe it was time that we left Saudi Arabia, but do we do that because we were attacked? Then it's you're appeasing terrorists, which we don't want to ever do. But at the same time, do we want to have bases in Saudi Arabia? We've chosen now not to. We no longer have bases there, and we've gone to a friendlier country. And then there are questions we have. The questions we have are we everywhere all the time to everyone, or are we nowhere and always here at home? And maybe we've gone too far in one extreme that we're everywhere all of the time. And so I think we do need to be concerned with our borders, for example, with national security. I talk a lot about the fact that 16 of the 19 hijackers came here on legal visas. 10 years later, the underwear bomber comes here on a legal visa. One-way ticket, no baggage, paid for with cash. His dad turned him in, and we still have no security in our country. We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars, and they can't stop a guy that has every red flag possible. So we do have to defend ourselves against these people, and having different foreign policy doesn't stop all of that. We do have to defend ourselves.
What would you change about our foreign policies to discourage another 9/11 from happening?
Right. I would end all travel visas to terrorist nations right now and stop them until we have a better idea and understanding of how to regulate and police our own visa system. So I would stop them. I'd put a moratorium. In that same vein, I would also introduce a frequent flyer plan internationally and domestically. And if you wanted to submit to a pre-screening process, my brother-in-law is an Air Force Academy graduate. He flies 3 times a week, and he scrutinized, wanted all this. My dad's a congressman, scrutinized, wanted. Could we not do a little bit of checking in advance and not waste our time on people who aren't going to attack us? 10 years, and it's not any better, because their answer is, let's double and triple the bureaucracy, let's throw money at it. Homeland Security, everybody's for it. Do you know who had the most earmarks for Homeland Security? Indiana. Do you know who got some money for Homeland Security? The Pumpkin Festival of Smithfield, a town of 2,000, the annual Pumpkin Festival got Homeland Security money. It's the same old pork barrel stuff that we throw in there. Instead of doing the right job, we just throw money at everything. So it will take someone to stand up and just say, let's don't throw money at everything.
That's anti-terrorists, but as far as anti-terrorism, it seems to me that Congressman Paul, you're talking about a situation where our policies alienated the United States from some parts of the world. Am I characterizing that correctly? And in that way, somewhat encouraged the attacks? Well,
yes, and when somebody gets murdered, the first question they always seem to ask in the press is, so-and-so is a suspect, but what's his motive? Is there a motive? And I think that is important, and nobody wants to talk about the motive, but it's out there, it's laid on a platter. Bin Laden writes of it. He wrote of it all the time, and he has a very strong motive. And as bad a guy as he is, he's not known to be a liar. So somebody should read that and find out, exactly what the motive is, and that affects our foreign policy. And if we ignore that, then I think we'll have more terrorism rather than less.
And the other question that you have to ask on the foreign policy is, he was our ally for 15 years. Bin Laden was on the CIA payroll. We gave him Stinger missiles. That was a mistake. It was the stated policy of our State Department throughout the 1980s to support radical jihad. That was now where everybody thinks jihad is a danger to our country, we were promoting it because they didn't like the Soviets. We hated the Soviets more, and we didn't realize radical jihad would eventually be a problem. Saddam Hussein was our ally. Those are the things about foreign policy that were mistakes. To give Hussein weapons and planes and billions of dollars because we hated the Iranians more than the Iraqis. But it all comes back to bite us because it's a a foreign policy that may be too overreaching, and it ignores our own defenses.
Is it too overreaching in Israel? Is that one area we'd like the U.S. to scale back its involvement or support?
Well, I think in Israel is an important ally in the Middle East. It's a democracy, and there are many things that we will have in common and should work together with. I do say, and I've told the people who do support Israel in a big way, I've said, look, the problem is that we give $6 billion to Israel's enemies that are all around her, and we give Israel $4 billion. One, we have to ask the question, where's the money coming from? We have a massive debt and we're out of money. And two, is it wise to sell $200 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia? What if next year they're overthrown and then they're a big threat to Israel? So we may not be helping Israel by funding both sides of the arms race. We fund Israel's side, but we also fund all of the Islamic ally people who are somewhat opposed to Israel. We give them money too. We give everybody money. That, I think, is a problem.
Are we occupiers of Israel?
I wouldn't say of Israel, no.
Congressman Paul?
No, that doesn't fit the description of occupying. We occupy other countries, though. We're occupying quite a few countries.
Obviously, this is an issue which has raised its head a couple times here in the campaign, and I'm trying just to make sure that I understand the position in terms of, is it because we can't afford it, or because it's the wrong idea for us to be supplying Israel or bankrolling some of that support?
Well, I think financially we have to look at what we're doing as a country, but I'm not saying we have no relationship with Israel or that we never sell anything to Israel. I'm saying right now we give $6 billion to all of their enemies, we give $4 billion to them, and we are a country that is approaching bankruptcy and approaching a deficit that is unmanageable. So I do think we have to rethink what we're doing on those. It's not to say that there's not going to be exchanges or sale of weapons to Israel. It's just to say we've gone way too far in a direction where we give everything to everyone, and we have to reevaluate what's going on.
Gitmo is another issue in the campaign. Congressman Paul, since you're both Dr. Paul, let's start with you. Should Guantanamo Bay be shut down?
Yes.
And why?
Because I don't like military prisons and military tribunals.
Would it be a danger at all to, where would those prisoners go?
They would go to the same courts that we tried the individuals that bombed the towers the first time. And they went into our court system and they were tried, and they're all in prison for life. Why should we be so frightened about that?
I guess the argument would be is that these are military combatants as opposed to civilian ones, and they're being treated with the rights as an American citizen.
That's where we get into the sloppy language, because the one thing that we as Republicans and conservatives have failed to stick to our guns on is the Constitution on war. You know, I was trying to get them to declare war when we went into Iraq so that you know who the enemy is and who the war is and where the battlefield is. But when you declare war on a tactic, the whole world is at war. And now we're attacking and arresting people and assassinating people worldwide. I think that's very dangerous, and I do not like the idea that Osama bin Laden right now is contemplating on declaring that an American-born citizen who happens to be probably a bad guy, but you and I don't know that he's an American citizen, he's contemplating on assassinating him. What has America come to? I mean, we have to have the law. We protect this because we're American citizens. If we want that same protection, but to say that, oh, he's an enemy combatant, he's a suspect 9 times out of 10. So I would say defending the rule of law is probably one of the most important things any of us can do, because someday we might like to be protected by the rule of law. So I think we should be very, very cautious, and we'd prevent a lot if we as conservatives would say, look, don't go to war unless it's declared. Know who the enemy is, fight, and win it, and get over with it, and don't have perpetual war for so-called perpetual peace. That's where I think our mistake has been.
Gitmo?
Now, my dad's only been here 20 minutes, and you're making me disagree with him. I haven't even got a chance to say hello. I don't think we should close down Gitmo until we decide what to do with the prisoners. I think there is a form of due process through the military trials. Our soldiers, if they're accused of murder in the battlefield, are tried in military court. Doesn't have exactly the same protections as our civilian courts do. But what I'm fearful of is that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, we didn't do all the right things, maybe, in the way he was apprehended, or we did things that we wouldn't do in civilian court. I'm afraid that we take his case into civilian court and the judge says, you did these things 12 tortured him or whatever you did to him, and his confession is thrown out. And I think that's a problem. I also think that if you pick up people in the battlefield, that you can't have a microphone coming from the helicopter that's bombing them saying, you have the right to remain silent. I just don't think we can have the same kind of thing in the battlefield. Now, not all of them were picked up in the battlefield. I do agree with my dad, though, that some of the confusion comes from declaration of war. The Supreme Court has upheld military tribunals in 2 cases in World War II, but war was declared. And so I am a big believer and a stickler for declaring war, and I would have, and if I'm elected, I will force a vote on declaration of war anytime we go to war. And I think it's open to discussion, though, whether or not you could declare war against a group or not. In Afghanistan's case, though, I think you could have declared war against, we asked the government to turn over the people in those camps. They refused. We could have declared war against the Taliban government and whoever they were harboring, and we should have, and then it would be clear-cut what is legal and what isn't legal, because we would have followed the rule of law then.
So you were in office right now, then, you would not support the war in Afghanistan because it's not a declared war?
I would support that we should declare it as a war if we were going to continue in a warlike fashion.
But if the Congress would not declare war, then you would not support that action?
Well, I think that's a tricky wicket to go through, and I haven't made a conclusion with regards to that in the sense that I think we have to ask questions. I think there needs to be a debate in the sense that we have to ask, is our national security threatened? Usually that question is asked in the very beginning when you declare war. Now we're in the middle of it. Does it make sense to declare war after 10 years? Then who do you declare war against? So it's a complicated question, but we do need to bring up the question because it's why, as we move forward at the very least, we should declare war, and I think that's the most important part of the discussion.
I'm getting the hard rap from the campaign. That means one more question, right?
All right, one
and
more.
that is, this is full circle, as far as the whole Tea Party movement, how much do you think that you helped to launch that, Congressman Paul, and do you see that as being a key to your son's campaign?
Well, I'll go back one step. I think Rand just proved he's his own man to think for himself. So the Tea Party movement, yes, there was a big surge of that interest on the Boston Tea Party Day. It was a big fundraiser. They were around the country, and they stood behind the campaign that I had, and it was a big event, a lot of money raised, and it was spontaneous. It was not organized from above. It was organized spontaneously at the grassroots. But I think it has morphed into something different. I don't think anybody knows what it is, except for one fact, that there's a lot of people in this country who are sick and tired of the status quo, conventional Republicans and conventional Democrats, conventional spending, and conventional foreign policy, the whole work. The American people are sick of it, and they're sick of this debt, and that's what the Tea Party movement is about, even though there's going to be a lot of variations. I think on the one issue that we just discussed, I think the Tea Party movement have some disagreements on foreign policy, but they're still the same people who are upset and want to do what's best for America. So I think we helped get it started. I have my own little private tea parties quite frequently, but most of them are held on college campuses, and I've been very encouraged that that group of Tea Party people, the young people, are inheriting this mess. They're very receptive to the views we've been talking about.
Last word.
Tea parties are huge. I think I was at maybe the first one in the country. Faneuil Hall, December 16th, 2007. We raised $6 million for my dad, but it was the Boston Tea Party, not the original Boston Tea Party. But I think the first of the wave that began, and it is a big movement, and I've met with a lot of the Tea Party folks in Kentucky, and we think we'll get a lot of them to support us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brandon.
Thanks.